I just wanted to also remind everyone that today is National World Suicide Prevention Day. So we have been very thankful that Garra was available on this Remembrance Day. So let's remember those we have lost to suicide, and let's break the stigma. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Garra.
Thank you so much, Kathleen, and thank you to the rest of the Families Together team for allowing me the opportunity to spend a couple of hours with folks this morning. And as Kathleen noted, it is World Suicide Prevention Day in the midst of World Suicide Prevention Week and a series of activities that'll be going on throughout the month. And we know that suicide prevention is something that we need to be addressing year-round, 365 days. But it is also important, as with other areas of health and wellness, that we spend some specific time, right, remembering and reflecting, as Kathleen noted, on people that we've lost to suicide, and also for suicide attempt survivors, people who struggle with thoughts of suicide, maybe have acted on those thoughts and are still with us, and to listen to those stories about how they overcame, right, those struggles. And for the people who continue to struggle with thoughts, maybe on a recurring basis, right? So as Kathleen noted, please make sure that in the midst of this, you're taking care of yourselves during the workshop. We encourage participation, and there will be some opportunities for participation throughout the workshop today. And so, as was noted, the name of the workshop is Gatekeepers to Hope, Learning How to Address Suicide. And I have the good fortune of working across New York State with many community coalitions and task forces that are dedicated to addressing suicide on the local level. That's a big portion of my responsibility as the coordinator of coalition and community initiatives. And whether it's in person or virtual, as we've all adjusted to over the last year plus, I have found that one of the most important messages to remind others and myself is this idea of keeping calm and practicing self-care. I imagine for each and every one of you on the call today, that even on a good day, there might be a little bit of stress that enters into your life. If that's not the case, if you find yourself being able to go even just one day without any stress in your life, please see me afterwards. I'd love to figure out your secret. But stress is part of our daily existence on some level. And if we then take the potential for stress and then intersperse it with the potential of helping support somebody who might be experiencing thoughts of suicide, then it is that much more crucial that we are taking care of ourselves. We probably all know that as adults, right, we can't be there for others unless we're taking care of ourselves. Use whatever metaphor or analogy you want. You can't give from an empty, or the airplane analogy that if the oxygen mask comes down when you're in flight, you have to put your mask on first before helping someone else. So I implore each and every one of you to make sure that on a regular and consistent basis, you're thoughtful and intentional with what you do to take care of yourself, to make sure you're doing things that are restorative in nature. And I get it that as adults, we're busy and we have a lot of spinning plates and a lot of different things to balance. But I also know that none of us are immune to life happening. And so it's imperative, right, for the people in your lives, your loved ones, your family members, your friends, your colleagues, for the people who count on you, that you're taking care of yourself. So I will get down off of that soapbox now, but I do implore you to make sure that you are taking care of yourself. I mentioned that we want this to be as much as possible interactive in nature. So before we go any further, I believe that Kathleen is going to populate a quick poll that we're going to ask people to respond to.
Yeah, I just launched the poll. Did everyone see it?
Right, so hopefully you have the ability to respond.
Kathleen, I don't see it. I don't know if anybody else doesn't see it, but if you could,
People are
everybody respond and,
Yep, they're responding. Yep.
okay, good.
So we're going to, let's see. We'll give it just another seconds. All right, so for that first question, if someone's behavior or words suggest that they're considering suicide, I would, and it looks like the vast majority of folks on this call would ask them, are they considering suicide? And you can see the results for the other possible options as well. We scroll down. I feel confident that I could help a person having thoughts of suicide. Good majority of people either agree or the response is neutral. And when we look at the last option, I'm attending this webinar because all of the above. So obviously there is a lot of personal and or professional experience with suicide in the virtual room with us today, which is again, that much more important that we take care of ourselves at any point in time, but certainly during the course of the workshop, if any of those personal or professional experiences bubble up in unexpected ways, please again, make sure that you are taking care of yourselves if you need to step away. And I believe that we'll be putting in, if it's not already in there, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline and crisis text number in the chat function if anyone needs that. All right, see if I can. So the objectives for the workshop this morning, we're going to begin to take a look and try to gain some basic understanding of suicide behavior, some related themes and some language, some common risk and protective factors and warning signs. We're going to look at recognizing how we can all help someone who may be experiencing current thoughts of suicide through the following manner. Asking somebody that you're worried about openly and directly. Providing an immediate response for somebody if they acknowledge that they're having thoughts of suicide or are in immediate suicidal crisis. And then explore options on how best to connect these individuals to additional resources. So that's going to be, from a very high level, what we'll be talking about for the next couple of hours. It's also important to understand what the workshop's not about, and it's not a substitute for professional care for someone experiencing suicidal thoughts, but it is intended, again, to provide the competencies and the confidence that any one of us can play that important role in helping someone experiencing thoughts of suicide to help keep safe. So why even consider having a workshop like this? Well, we know that thoughts of suicide are not that uncommon. Thoughts of suicide don't discriminate by age, by race, by gender, by ethnicity. And even people with a great deal of multiple coping skills and protective factors can experience these thoughts of suicide for reasons that are unique to themselves. And in your personal and or professional life, it wouldn't be unusual to encounter someone who might be in extreme emotional distress or who stated directly that they're thinking about killing themselves, about ending their lives. If that's true, then it places us, all of us, in the position of being a possible gatekeeper. We know that being direct and supportive to someone having thoughts of suicide can help reduce the immediate potential for that person to act on those thoughts and instead open up the possibility to explore other options and put in place other supports. And this presentation is informed by widely accepted gatekeeper principles. So another way to think about why talk about suicide in this context, every couple of years, and this information does need to be updated, but it continues to reflect what you're seeing here. In 2017, the National Survey on Drug Use and Health Survey asks questions around suicidal thoughts, attempts, and medically treated attempts among adults in the US. And you can see that in 2017, over 10.5 million individuals identified having had thoughts of suicide in the US, in the adult population. But when we look at thoughts versus action, versus attempts, we can see that number goes down drastically, and even more so to medically treated suicide attempts. So one of the takeaways from this slide, one of the messages, right, is that the vast majority of people thinking about suicide don't act on those thoughts, but also it tells us that we can help. We can help prevent, in many instances, those thoughts from becoming actions. And to me, that's the hope, that's the promise of the work that I'm fortunate to be involved with across New York State. So you've heard me use the term gatekeeper in a couple of slides already. So what is a gatekeeper? It's a term that we use often in this field. And it stemmed from the Surgeon General's national strategy for suicide prevention in 2001, 20 years ago. And a gatekeeper is defined as someone who's in a position to recognize a crisis and the warning signs that someone might be thinking about suicide. So similar to CPR or first aid, in first aid where we train people to recognize when somebody might be having some sort of medical distress, it starts with recognizing what that might look like. So who is a gatekeeper? A gatekeeper is anyone, or can be anyone, friends, family, neighbors, doctors, nurses, many other individuals that are strategically positioned to recognize and refer someone who may be experiencing thoughts of suicide. So just as with first aid, it's not just enough to recognize when somebody might be in medical or physical distress. Part of it is offering some immediate, tangible help until other resources get into place. And that is in essence what a suicide first aid gatekeeper can be doing. They may be trained to recognize risk of suicide and refer them or connect them to additional services as appropriate. So in other words, each and every one of us are in a position to be that vital link to hope. This is not about being all things to all people, right? But if we are in that gatekeeper role and we recognize that someone might be struggling, we can help link them. We can help connect them to that next loop in the chain to further explore resources and options for living. There's not much that we're going to be talking about as it relates to specific data in this presentation, but this is a really important slide too. It's important to understand that for every person who dies by suicide every year, another roughly 280 people think seriously about suicide, but do not kill themselves. For those of you who have experienced loss by suicide, my heart aches for you. There are no words to adequately share the sorrow that's behind that loss. For those of you who have experienced thoughts of suicide or maybe made attempts, we need to make sure that as part of suicide prevention, we're talking to those individuals too. Think about that. For every person who dies by suicide, another 280 individuals think about suicide, but don't kill themselves. What can we learn from those individuals? That slide, that information, again, I think provides a sense of real hope that we can continue to make an impact and prevent those thoughts from becoming actions. So I assume that everyone on this call is a caring person, that we would all want to help someone if we knew that they were experiencing thoughts of suicide, that we would want to do the best that we could. So if that's true, and I believe that it is, then what might get in our way of reaching out directly to someone we suspect might be considering suicide? Because there are sometimes, unfortunately, some barriers, some preconceived notions that might get in our way. So I'm going to ask people to use the chat function to respond with true or false to the following statements. True or false, asking people directly, are you thinking about suicide? Will give them the idea. True or false? So folks, please use the chat function. Wonderful to see all the responses indicating false. You can imagine, though, that unfortunately, in some instances and in some settings, there still might be this perception that asking somebody about suicide, if they're not thinking about it, can give them the idea. The research tells us that asking someone directly about suicide will not put the idea in their head or push them into action. In fact, we know that asking someone directly, are you thinking about killing yourself? Are you thinking about suicide? May be the question to help save their life. Inviting people to talk openly and directly about their thoughts of suicide reduces stigma, can help to lower anxiety and opens communication, and can very likely lower the risk of an impulsive act. And if we ask someone directly about suicide and they say no and we believe them, there's no harm done, right? In fact, what might happen is that person now knows that you're the kind of individual who's comfortable talking openly and directly about suicide. Next question. People experiencing thoughts of suicide keep their plans to themselves. What do we think? True or false? Some mix here, some false, some true, a little of both. Thank you, everyone, for sharing your responses. So we know that most people in a suicidal crisis show some sort of sign that they are thinking about death. Those signs can be verbal or not, and we'll talk more about this later on, about what some of those signs might look like. We also refer to them as invitations. It's also true that the people around them may not recognize those signs. It's also true that those signs, in some instances, might be subtle or indirect. And it's also true that while the research tells us that the vast majority of people who attempt or complete suicide have, quote, told someone, right? It's also true that they may not have told you. They may have told other people. And in many, many instances, the person experiencing thoughts of suicide might not even be aware consciously that the things that they're saying or doing are in essence their way of inviting help to say that life's really hard right now. Although we hear about this in the media often, the research tells us that the suicide that occurs, quote, out of the blue with no warning signs at all whatsoever is very rare. It can happen, and it does, but in the vast majority of instances, right, the person who acts on those thoughts of suicide, directly or indirectly, has told one, and in many instances, many people, that they're struggling. It's just that they may not have done it in a direct manner that's always recognizable. And that's in part what the workshop is about, is to try to empower each of us to think about the different ways in which people might be creatively inviting help. Next question. Only people with mental illness are at risk for or have thoughts of suicide. What do we think? Right. It's like everyone is responding that that statement is false. And while it's true, having a mental illness can increase one's risk or vulnerability for suicide, anyone can experience thoughts of suicide. And why it's important to spend a second talking about this particular statement is that sometimes we have this preconceived notion. Who is a suicide look like? What do they sound like? What category might they fall into? And again, while having a mental illness might increase your risk, it doesn't mean that you're going to have thoughts of suicide or that you're going to die by suicide. It just increases your vulnerability, just like being a smoker can increase your vulnerability for any number of different health-related outcomes. It doesn't mean it's going to happen. So by asking this question, we want to remind ourselves not to have a narrow vision of who a person with thoughts of suicide might be. Anyone, again, for reasons unique to themselves, can experience thoughts of suicide. I believe this is the last question. If someone is talking about suicide, directly or indirectly, then they're probably not serious. What do we think? True or false? It's like I think the vast majority are looking at false, a couple of maybe true or both. So the response is false. And we know that people who talk about suicide, directly or indirectly, may very well attempt suicide and unfortunately sometimes die. We want to look at this idea that people who are talking about suicide are inviting help. Ultimately, the takeaway from this particular statement is that we need to take all threats, all talk about suicide seriously, right? And could it be true that there are some people who talk about suicide openly and directly, but their intention may not necessarily be about suicide? Unfortunately, that can be the case. For some people, the most sophisticated way they know how to ask for help is to talk about suicide, even if that's not what's on their mind. So if that's true, if that's the best way they know how to ask for help, and I recognize that that can be emotionally taxing, right? But maybe it then suggests that, A, if that person is doing that to ask for help, maybe we need to find out how best to give them the help that they're asking for. And maybe we also need to really work with that person to find other ways to ask for that help. But at the end of the day, so important to remember that all threats, all communication about suicide must be taken seriously. You don't want to put yourself in a position to be the sole arbiter of, is this person being serious or not? Because for some people, if they don't feel like they're getting the help that they're asking for, they may increase actions and behaviors, even without the intention of dying, that could accidentally result in death. Getting other people involved, having other people listening and participating in sharing resources and connecting with that individual are so important. So all of those statements that we just went through are myths, and they could potentially get in people's way of getting involved or attempting to help someone struggling with thoughts of suicide. So why is it important to know that? Why do we talk about that in this setting? So that each and every one of you on the call can be a myth buster. Personally, professionally, whatever the setting is, if you hear people, and I believe this is innocent in nature and not malicious, but if you hear people sharing these myths or perpetuating them, then I believe we're all in a position to gently educate people and let them know the truth behind these statements. Probably one of the biggest questions that gets asked in any number of different settings, whether it be in a workshop like this, or certainly in response to somebody acting on thoughts of suicide, is the question you see in front of you now. What might lead someone to think about or attempt to kill themselves? So I'm going to attempt to answer that in a very high level kind of a way. And the response is based in part on research that we have in many instances informed by suicide attempt survivors. And summing up that knowledge base, people thinking about suicide and that act on those thoughts often describe feeling helpless, hopeless, alone, and worthless. Those four feeling states are often at the core of somebody thinking about or acting on thoughts of suicide. And it's not that they want to die. The vast majority of people struggling with thoughts of suicide, it's not that they want to die. It's they don't know how to go on living at that particular moment in time, experiencing this intense amount of psychic and emotional pain, coupled with feelings of hopelessness. We've all had bad days before, right? I'm sure there's not a one of us on the call today that hasn't had a really miserable day. But for most of us, right, whether it's one day or maybe a couple of days strung together, we can do that self-talk, right? We can tell ourselves, boy, if I can only get through the rest of the day, if I can only get home and get into my comfy clothes and talk with friends, talk with family, whatever those self-soothing things are, even if we're having a really lousy day, most of us can sort of see the light at the end of the tunnel. For many people experiencing thoughts of suicide, they don't see that light. The feeling state can be, life was really hard and sucked yesterday. It's really hard and sucks today, and it's not going to get any better tomorrow. What a horrible, horrible place to be in for any amount of time, right? So in that psychic and emotional pain, right? Think about if any of you have ever had a physical pain that's been so profound, it's exceeded your own personal physical pain threshold. And we all have them. We all have our own personal pain threshold. And if we've ever exceeded that pain, it can be unbearable. And we might think to ourselves, oh my gosh, what can I do? I would do anything for this pain to end. Well, can you imagine that for somebody experiencing an intense amount of psychic and emotional pain, the narrative in their head might be the same thing. All they know is they want the pain to end. And we know that for most people, where suicide's become an option, suicide's not about death. It's about some last resort where they feel as nothing else has worked to erase that pain, to erase that loneliness and suffering. Now, we talk about a sense of aloneness, and that can be sort of again, a feeling state that despite the evidence that might be to the contrary, many people experiencing thoughts of suicide can describe feeling utterly alone, despite the fact that they might have friends and family and siblings and pets and jobs and school and sports and athletics, right? On the outside looking in, we might be able to describe any series of things that would refute a sense of being alone. But for that person in that moment or those moments, they might feel totally and utterly alone. And again, what a horrible place to be in. And lastly, this thinking often happens in the context of a crisis the individual is facing. And that crisis is self-described. What I see as a crisis, you might not see as a crisis, and vice versa, right? It's how we are experiencing something or some series of things. And I don't know about you, but I don't do my best thinking in a crisis. My ability to see options, even if those options are immediately to my left or my right, can become really clouded. I'm not going to read through all of these, but as we continue to talk a little bit more about suicide and related themes and terms, just want to provide a sense of some shared definitions. So I'll leave this up here for a second for folks to look at. This webinar is being recorded and folks will be able to access it afterwards. But just to have a shared sense of some of the terminology that's often used in this work. So to drill down a little bit further, use the term suicidal crisis. So what does that mean? What does that look like? What are some of the moving parts? So there's this acute phase for many individuals when that person is ready to act on thoughts of suicide. Those thoughts may have been building over a period of time. Things may have been building in their life to contribute to that crisis point, but that acute phase, when that person is ready to move from thoughts to actions, is just that. It's acute and it's often very brief in nature. For the vast majority of individuals, that overwhelming impulse to die often fades. And for many people, it may never recur or only flare up episodically. It's rarely a chronic state. It's also important to understand that that escalation from misery to life is really hard. All of these things are compounding the way I'm feeling, and it's getting worse and I'm not seeing any options. The escalation from that feeling state to suicide becoming an option, to having thoughts of suicide, to making an attempt, that can happen really quickly. And it can be hard to predict. And oftentimes, it might be triggered by some external event, the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back, if you will, right? And so it's important, as we think about the information being shared, to recognize that that can happen really quickly. And why that's important is, again, it tells us, hopefully, that we realize that we potentially might be in a position, right, to slow things down, to slow that escalation down before those thoughts become actions. And while the period of vulnerability might last for a while, really important to remember those acute flare-ups are typically brief. Hopefully that's comforting for us, but it can also be comforting for the person that perhaps we're talking with, to let them know that the way they're feeling right now won't last forever. If we can intervene at any point but especially during that acute phase, we may be able to get that individual connected to additional resources and life connections. As I'm sure you all know, and is true in any number of different topics and circumstances, language matters. Right? This is not semantics. This is not about trying to be politically correct. This is trying to remind each and every one of us that language does matter, and choosing compassionate and accurate language is really important, including when we're talking about suicide. So you see some language that we want to consider using as opposed to some terms that we want to avoid, right? So instead of committed suicide, which can have connotations around, negative connotations around, well, people commit crimes, or for people with a strong faith tradition, you can commit sins, or in the mental health world, you can be committed, right? Those can have negative connotations. We want to use maybe died of or died by suicide. Certainly, we want to avoid the term successful attempt. What is a successful suicide attempt? It means the person's no longer with us. It means they're dead. There's nothing successful about that. So instead, we just want to use the term suicide or suicided. Unsuccessful attempt, what does that mean? If we use that term, unsuccessful attempt means the person's still alive. That's a good thing. The other reason to avoid using the term unsuccessful attempt is inadvertently, what's the message to the person who survived? The message could be, even though it's probably not our intent, the message could be, you got that wrong too. You screwed that up. So instead, suicide attempt. Sometimes in this work, we might hear the term manipulative or attention-seeking behavior. Instead of using those terms, just describe the behavior that you're observing. All right, instead of a suicidal gesture or cry for help, describe the behavior. Certainly, right, we don't want to use the term that person's schizophrenic or that person's borderline, just like we don't say that person's cancer or that person's heart disease. We could just use the term that person's diagnosed with. It doesn't define their totality, right? And we don't want to think about we are dealing with suicidal patients, right? We're working with suicidal individuals. So consider this the public service announcement portion of the workshop, just to remind ourselves the importance of language. So most people thinking about suicide invite help. I've mentioned this before, either directly or indirectly before ever acting on those thoughts. Those invitations are sometimes referred to as warning signs, and as with any kind of warning sign, if we become aware of their existence, then we need to act. And for invitations or warning signs around suicide, we need to act immediately. Whether those invitations are direct or indirect, the person thinking about suicide has a tale to tell. And I'll be talking and walking us through the mnemonic for tale, which in this instance stands for talk, actions, life situations, and emotions. So the following slides will help us look at the different ways in which people might tell their tale. So the T stands for talk. What type of things are you or others hearing that person talk about, directly or indirectly, through social media, through text, through other forms of communication that might lead you to suspect that person might be struggling, right? That communication, the way they are talking, doesn't have to be in person, right? We know that we communicate through all manner of different platforms these days. If these communications seem out of character or unusual for that person, or they cause you to be concerned, it may be their way of inviting help. even if they're not fully aware they're doing so. So some examples of talk might certainly be a direct manner. I feel like killing myself. And you see some of the other examples that are up there. So real quick, in the chat function, what are some other examples? What are some forms of communication, be it verbal or text or social media, that you might become aware of that might cause you to be concerned? If you take a second and jot them in the chat. What might someone tell you, directly or indirectly? Depressing posts or quotes on Facebook? Absolutely. I wish this was all over with. Excellent. So we're actually, this is great. We're looking at both talk and the next step as well, some actions. You'd be better off without me. I can't deal with this anymore. I give up. Excellent. Nobody cares about me. These are all great examples. I feel like a burden. It's a very common statement and feeling state that we might hear and become aware of. Excellent. So it's important because if we think about a lot of the examples that you all just shared and some of the examples that are on the slide deck, by themselves, they might not seem of particular concern. How often might we hear somebody say, I can't take this any longer? Now, maybe they're at work and they're having a bad day, right? And we might see that as an innocent statement. But can you imagine that for some people where things have gotten so bad, they're considering suicide, directly or indirectly? That's their way of sending out an invitation for help, right? I just can't take this anymore. I don't want to be here anymore. I wish things were all over. Those statements on the surface seem so innocuous, but can you imagine that for some people, people are doing the best they know how to communicate that as a way of saying, I need help.
Garra, can it also be when someone might be a very introverted person and very quiet and keeping to themselves, and then all of a sudden they're happy and outgoing and seem at peace? Could also be a sign that they've made the decision that they may take their life.
Absolutely, Kathleen, and actually that speaks really loudly to actions, right? People don't even necessarily verbally need to communicate that, but the A part of TAIL stands for actions. And have we noticed a change in that person's actions that seem out of character or behaving in such a way that's worrisome? But to your point, and to your wondering, the fact that somebody who maybe their baseline is they're quiet and they're shy and they're introverted and they're that wallflower that likes to sort of blend into the background, and all of a sudden they don't seem to have a care in the world, and they're happy-go-lucky and they seem very upbeat. That change in behavior, that change in actions can absolutely be an indicator that that person's made up their mind, that maybe they've been having this internal struggle in their head of, I want to die, but I'm not a bad person. I just don't know how to keep on living. For some people, if they've come to the conclusion that their only option is to end their life, there can be a sense of comfort and relief, and like a weight is lifted. And not that that is a decision we would have anybody come to, but you can almost see the logic and the rationale for some people, how they arrive at that decision. And so, yes, absolutely, that action of all of a sudden not seeming to have a care in the world and like some burden has been lifted, that can be an action that might be a way of inviting help, that they've made a decision. Are they acting recklessly or careless? Or perhaps beginning to explore ways in which they might kill themselves? So here's a list of possible actions, right? Maybe that person's beginning to isolate or withdraw. Loss of interest. self-medicating, change in work or class attendance, risk-taking behaviors. So again, in the chat function, and you mentioned some of these before, are there any other examples of actions, things that we can observe, things that we can notice that could be that person's way of inviting help? So I'll give you a second to see if there's any other examples. Absolutely. Risky behavior, not caring if they die, right? Driving really quickly and recklessly without the seatbelt, taking chances, weaving in and out of traffic, and giving away a pet. Absolutely. Any other examples of actions that you can think of that could be that person's way of inviting help? Not interested in the normal things, wanting bad attention. That's a really great example. Not every example or action is sort of neutral. For some people, their actions, their behaviors can be off-putting. That can be particularly true for adolescent males that might be experiencing thoughts of suicide, right? They can get aggressive, right? Nobody wants to be around that, but that might be the best they know how to invite help, right? I'm so sorry, Shannon, for that friend that you indicated that lost their struggle to suicide. These are all great examples of actions, right? I think one of the takeaways as it relates to actions is that anything can be an invitation, any behavior, especially a change in that person's sort of baseline, can be their way of inviting help. People can get really creative in the way that they ask for help. And again, they're not always things that are neutral or non-impactful. Some of them might be off-putting, right? So we really need to be open to observing and listening to and trying to understand, is this person doing the best they can to invite help? So we talked about talk, we talked about actions, life situations, the L part of TAIL. People respond to life events in a variety of ways, especially when some sort of loss is involved. And while a loss might not seem significant to one person, it could be devastating to someone else. We all experience loss differently, and it doesn't have to be a physical loss, right? Loss can be defined on any number of different levels. So the way in which someone interprets and understands a loss or a life situation can leave someone feeling isolated and alone and helpless. So some possible examples of losses that could leave someone feeling that unbearable pain and hopelessness, and you see the examples there, right? What are some other examples of loss that might lead someone to potentially feel that sense of unbearable pain and hopelessness?
Garra, prior to that question, I think there was something in the chat that was pretty important, that one of the participants had made that her ex-husband would call the police in hopes to become aggressive, and when they showed up, he would want them to shoot him. They never did, and he went and got help. But I know that has been in the news too, with that way of wanting to die as well.
Right, and we hear about. Thank you for sharing that, Kathleen. And we hear about that, unfortunately, all too often. And in many instances, I'm making a broad generality here, the individual who is acting aggressively towards police, they might not even say, I want you to kill me, or I want to die, but that might be the underlying motivation, right? And again, if we think about the idea that most people want help figuring out how to stay alive, is that behavior, is that action the best that person knows how to do to say, I just don't know what else to do. I am at the end. I need help, right? I see a bunch of great examples of loss in here. And we could probably spend a great deal of time coming up with additional examples. At the end of the day, right, as I stated in the previous slide, anything can be construed as a loss for someone. And what's a loss for you might not be a loss for me, and vice versa. It's important not to minimize someone's reactions and response to a loss. If we don't know or understand the impact that an event has had on someone, ask them. Don't assume that because it wasn't significant to us, it isn't significant for others. So the last letter in tail is E. It's emotions, right? As human beings, we're emotional creatures. We all have the ability and a capacity to tell when someone might not be doing well, right? We can often read other people's emotions and suspect if they're happy or sad, angry or scared, right? Some people walk around with those proverbial emojis, you know, pretty plain to see. Individuals thinking about suicide might display a variety of emotional states that could be a direct or indirect way of inviting help. So again, here are some examples of those emotions, of those feeling states that we might become aware of. So as you look at those, what are some other possible examples of feeling states that we might become aware of that might be that person's way of expressing they need help? What are some other feeling states? Despair, helplessness, shame, absolutely. Shame is often connected with the potential for contributing to thoughts of suicide. Pain, and that pain can be physical, it can be certainly emotional in nature, right? This feeling state of everything is funny, right? Absolutely. These are great examples. Heartbroken, grief, absolutely. Exhaustion, very good. So if other considerations, thinking about this idea of the fact that people have a tale to tell that are thinking about suicide, right? The previous examples that someone shares, it's not complete, as we saw by being able to add to the existing slide decks through the chat. People can and likely will be very creative in the ways they invite help. And even if you don't know someone particularly well, you can still be in tune to their tale. Really important. A really important takeaway is trust your gut, trust your instinct. If the interaction you're having with someone seems off, strikes you as odd or out of character, if it's someone that you know, trust your instinct. Give yourself permission to recognize that, that was unusual, that was off, that was odd. I wonder what that means. And assume that you're the only one that's aware of their tale and be prepared to act. Oftentimes, even if we are much more so aware on a cognizant level and we're wondering if that person could be thinking about suicide, that can be scary, right? I get it. It can be overwhelming. And so we might try to give ourselves a sense of security by saying, well, I'm sure somebody else is probably going to deal with it. Somebody else is probably going to approach them. Somebody else is probably going to have a conversation with them. Maybe they will. Maybe they won't. Maybe you're the only person who noticed their tale. Assume that you're the only one and be prepared to act. And what do we do if we become aware of any of these invitations? Well, there's some steps, concrete, straightforward steps we can all take if we suspect somebody might be struggling. And in this instance, all stands for ask, listen, and link. So how do we conceptualize using these steps? Well, with the ask stage, some things to consider. If you're worried about someone because of the tale they're sharing, the first thing to do is to see if those worries are connected to suicide. We need to begin by expressing to that person what's caused us to be concerned in the first place. What are those communications, those actions, life stressors, emotions that we've become aware of? What's the context for sharing our concerns? Certainly, we would want to have this conversation in private or with minimal distractions, and then ask that person openly and directly if they may be having thoughts of suicide. And we need to put language to it. We need to use the term suicide. Now, for young kids, sometimes, really young kids developmentally, the word suicide may not necessarily register, but unfortunately, we know that young kids can get to a point where life's become so hard that all they know is that they don't want to be here anymore. So we do need to find other language that we can use to ask a young person, maybe something like, do you wish you could go to sleep at night and never wake up, for example, right? We want to try to get to what is that person thinking about? Do they no longer want to be here? But for most individuals, we want to be direct. We want to ask, are you thinking about suicide, right? And don't assume that that person is going to eventually tell you directly without being asked. Most people experiencing thoughts of suicide, even though there's probably a good part of them that's uncertain and that doesn't want to die, most people still can find it really difficult to take that next step and to put words to their thoughts. They need us. They need you to be that one to meet them where they're at, to share what we've been seeing and hearing and observing, and to ask them directly about suicide. And if they say yes to our question, what do? First thing is take a breath. All right. For some people, asking might not be the hard part. The hard part might be, what if they say yes? Right. So the L part of we all have a role to play is to listen. Right. It's important that you spend some time listening to that person. Thank them for having the courage to tell you they've been thinking about suicide. Certainly, we want to ask them if they've already done something to harm themselves. That's really important to find out. If they've already done something to harm themselves, then we need to act immediately, right? We need to make sure that that person is medically evaluated, right? So whether that's calling 911, if we're in a position to transport that person, whatever the case is, right? For somebody who's already acted on those thoughts of suicide, but is engaged in a conversation with us, then we need to act on that immediately. That could also be what the step is if that person appears ready to act on those thoughts, right? But if they haven't done anything and they don't appear as though they're likely to do anything immediately, ask if they can share a little bit about what's been going on that's led them to this point. Listen to them without judgment. Listening helps to ease the pain, and it validates that person and can help making a connection to additional resources that much easier. You might be the first person that individual's ever shared and talked about their thoughts of suicide. What an honor it is to be that person, to be in a position to have that person bear witness to some of the really hard thoughts that are going on. And don't lose sight of the fact that by them talking to you is one way of letting you know that they're not certain about wanting to die. So in this listening phase, I want you to consider the following. This idea about it's not about the nail and weight. So we we checked this out beforehand, and we're going to do a quick little presto changeo, and I'm going to stop sharing. And Kim is going to share this video clip. We want to make sure that is as seamless for everyone as possible. So I'm going to stop sharing, and Kim is going to then share this very brief video clip. No volume, Kim.
Bear with me, everybody.
This makes it an official workshop, right?
It's just, there's all this pressure, you know? And sometimes it feels like it's right up on me, and I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head, and it's relentless. And I don't know if it's gonna stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever gonna stop.
Yeah. Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I mean, I'll bet if we got that out of there...
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing...
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
Yeah, see, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail
See, you're
out.
not even listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just, sometimes it's like, there's this achy, I don't know what it is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. I mean, all of them.
That sounds really hard.
It is. Thank you. Ow!
Oh, come on. If you would just...
Don't!
Try to see things my way.
All right, so I'm going to go back to sharing again. And I like to use that video clip just as I think a great way, slightly humorous way, to illustrate what we mean by listening without judging, listening without trying to fix someone. Ultimately, and I'm sure this is something that you all know, but just to reinforce, people don't want to be fixed. They want to be heard. They want to be witnessed, right? And I'm sure you can all think of times in your own lives when you've been struggling with some sort of problem, not related to suicide, but just struggling with some difficulty, and you've had someone that you could talk to and they listen to you. And during the course of that conversation, in many instances, literally just by having that sounding board, we can oftentimes begin to come up with our own solutions. Maybe they're not clearly in focus, right? And so if you ever find yourself in a position to help support someone experiencing current thoughts of suicide, if it's helpful, right? Remember, it's not about the nail. The other just graphic you see at the bottom there is if we're having a conversation with somebody, if they're talking, we need to wait. W-A-I-T. And in this instance, that stands for, why am I talking, right? What's the purpose of what we're saying at any given point in time? Is it to fill empty spaces? Or is it out of a sense of nervousness. So to consider making sure that we wait when somebody is talking. So the last L part of we all have a role to play is to link, right? To link that person to additional resources and supports that they can use to help keep themselves safe. Let that person know getting extra help is important. Let them know that this is beyond you and me right here in this moment, that we need to get others involved. One of the questions when discussing who you might link them to is asking that person, is there anyone you've already talked to about how you're feeling? Or is there anyone else that you think might be helpful to connect with right now? It's important that for the person experiencing thoughts of suicide, to the extent possible, we give them as much control over the scenario as possible. For many people experiencing thoughts of suicide, they feel as though their life has gone out of control, right? That there's nothing that they can impact and influence. So asking that person, is there someone you'd like to reach out to? Now, we don't want to promise something that might not be in that person's best interest, but we at least want to explore having that conversation. And again, it's going to look different if the conversation is with a youth or an adolescent versus someone who's an adult. The nature of the relationship might very well influence all of this, right? But ultimately, when we think about helping someone experiencing current thoughts of suicide, it's not something we do to someone. It should be thought of something that we do with someone. If the conversation is happening in person, we want to stay with that person while we make that first link to other resources. We don't want to leave that person alone, although you do need to do a check-in with yourself. If we feel our own personal safety may be at risk, right, we're going to need to negotiate and navigate that. But ideally and ultimately, we don't want to leave that person alone when we're making that connection. If the conversation is happening over social media or text, right, clearly identify with the person what the agreed upon next immediate step will be, and ask if they need any other assistance to make that happen. Maybe practice, whether it's in person or over the phone or over text, practice how that person might begin the next conversation. So I want you to think about, in your personal life or your professional life, what does linking someone, let's use an agency lens, for example, what does linking someone to your agency look like? So this is a rhetorical question, but I think it's really important that each and every one of you, through the work that you do in particular, right, think about what linking someone in your community or organization looks like. If this is happening through the agency lens, what does it look like? If it's happening in the community, who would you connect someone to? We'll have some very general resources at the end of the workshop, but it's important, whatever the context is that you might be using this information, to be thinking about not just, am I willing to help connect someone to additional resources, but what does that process look like? Am I aware of what those resources are? So I talked.
We had, pardon me, we had one person make a statement in the chat that, and this happened to me as well, that her daughter is constantly rejecting and resisting help, and she only wants to talk to the mom. Do you have anything for that, where how mom could help get her a little bit more open to additional services? Is there something for a link there?
Yeah, that is hard. And my heart goes out for, parents, caregivers who find themselves in that scenario. And that's not, I don't think that's all that unusual. I think, and this is a very generalized statement in broad strokes, right? But I think trying to help our children, or if they're adults, right? If somebody's making that statement, I only want to talk with you, right, for whatever reason, is to be honest in a caring way and saying, I want to be there for you, but I can't be there 24/7. We need to explore other resources. I'm afraid that I could let you down. And again, these are just very generalized possible ways to further elaborate on that conversation of recognizing that I have limits, right? I have an adult child who struggles with chronic pain, mental health issues, has had her own thoughts of suicide. It's important that she knows that I will do whatever I can, right, if she's feeling and experiencing those thoughts. But I have limits, and it's not fair to her to try to put all of her questions around support in me, because I have failings and I can't be there 24/7 as much as I might want to. And I think that's true with any of us in any situation where we are a caregiver to someone experiencing thoughts of suicide. So having those conversations and maybe doing some of those hypotheticals even, and I tend to not always be fond of hypotheticals, but maybe having those sort of what if conversations. What if I got ill and had to go to the hospital and wasn't available immediately to help you? Who else could you reach out to? Who else could we include in that safety net? So I know that some of those ideas may work and some of those ideas might not work. The other thought and suggestion I would have for anyone, right, and especially if this is involving family or close friends and loved ones, is to make sure that if you're in that role to sort of be that primary support for someone experiencing thoughts of suicide, is to make sure that you're getting resources and help for yourself, right? Make sure that however you can, and there are agencies and organizations and resources around the state that can try to help support you as that family member, right? So that you can replenish and renourish. That was a great question. Thank you for sharing that. When we're having these conversations, there's also some things that we should look to avoid. We don't want to ask in a manner that's judgmental or that's already suggesting the answer that we want. You're not thinking of doing anything stupid, are you? Right. Well, you can imagine that that's probably going to shut the communication down right away. We don't want to rely on the term hurting yourself in place of suicide. The question must be asked directly. And the question of, are you thinking of hurting yourself, can have different meanings to different people. They might be confusing it with what's technically known as non-suicidal self-injury, which typically is not about wanting to end one's life, right? So there could be confusion there. The other challenge with asking, are you thinking about hurting yourself, is, as I noted before, for most people thinking about suicide, it's not that they want to die, it's that they don't know how to go on living with that psychic and emotional pain. And if we ask the question, are you thinking of hurting yourself? They might look you square in the eye and say no. And we might believe them, because the last thing that person wants to do is to hurt. They're trying to avoid, they're trying to get rid of that hurt. So we need to put language to it. I know suicide is a harsh sounding word, but we need to openly and directly give permission to talk about suicide. We can't accept a vague or non-direct answer. If you ask the question openly and caringly, are you thinking about suicide, and the person says, I don't know, or maybe, that's not a direct response to a direct question. There's only two responses to the question of, are you thinking about suicide? A yes or a no. We want to avoid acting shocked. We don't want to lecture on the value of life or say that suicide is wrong. Of course, we don't want that to be an option for people, But if that's where the person is thinking about, then that's their starting point. And for that person at that moment, suicide's not wrong. We certainly don't want to judge or minimize what they're experiencing. Again, sort of going back to it's not about the nail. We don't want to inadvertently make statements that could add to feelings of shame, like, well, what'll happen to your kids? Or that's being really selfish. We don't want to argue with a person or debate or and otherwise try to fix their problems. Remember, it's not about how bad the problem is, but how badly it's hurting that person. We certainly don't want to be sworn to secrecy or dismiss their thoughts as attention seeking or make promises that either we're not able to keep or aren't in that person's best interest. So I'm going to walk us quickly through two situations, two scenarios. And then Kathleen and I are going to do sort of a live role play, if you will, to follow up on these examples. So the first situation is it's a direct invitation. You're talking, you're interacting with somebody, and they tell you directly, whatever the context is, that they're thinking about suicide. What do you do with that? Well, as I noted before, take a breath, literally give yourself a second to sort of be taken aback, right? Take that literal and metaphorical breath. That person might sound distressed and agitated, but the fact that they're telling you this information suggests that there's a part of them that wants help to choose life. And we know that most people thinking about suicide are receptive to help. Let that person know that you're glad they're talking to you and that you want to be helpful, right? So you might say something like, I'm glad you shared that with me. It took a lot of courage. I'm so sorry to hear that things have gotten to the point where suicide has become an option. I want to try and help if I can. Let's find someplace private to talk. Again, this is just a generic example. You're going to find your own words, and a lot of what you say is going to be dependent on the context and the situation. The next thing we want to do is find out if that person has taken any steps towards suicide. Because remember, if they've already done something to harm themselves, or they're behaving or saying things in such a fashion that leads us to believe that they're about to, maybe they're talking about having pills or firearms close by and they're prepared and ready to use them, then again, we need to act immediately for safety, right? But that step should only be done if they've done something to activate those thoughts or appear as though they're likely to do so. If the person hasn't done anything to harm themselves yet, or they don't seem likely to, then we can move on to the next step. And that's the listening step, right? This might be the first time they've talked about their thoughts of suicide, and just talking might lead that person to be more willing to accept additional help. Remember, it's not about the nail, right, in this step. Just pay attention to what that person is telling you. Practice reflective listening. You know, in their story, what they're telling you might not always make sense. It might not be linear. And that's okay, because it's their story, right? So you might say something like, I'm glad to, as you've been listening, I'm glad to hear things haven't gotten so bad that you don't think you can keep yourself safe. Can you share a little bit about what's been going on that's led you to think about suicide? And after that person's had the opportunity to share, and you begin to sense they might feel less distressed, begin to summarize what it is you're hearing in anticipation of moving to the next step. So you might say something like, so I want to understand, I hear that you're very upset because your wife left you over gambling problems. And now you're worried that you might lose your job. Do I have this right? Now, again, this is just by way of example. You're going to reflect back what it is you've heard that's led that person to consider suicide. You could also ask, is there anything else going on in your life that's contributing to thoughts of suicide? And this is not about becoming a counselor or a therapist. This is not about therapy. It's about listening to help ease that pain and validate what it is they're experiencing. And once we've listened to them, once we've gotten that sense that maybe they're not feeling quite as distraught, we want to connect that person to someone who can do an intervention. So personally or professionally, whatever the setting is, we want to be aware of what those resources are. You see the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline flyer up there. There's in crisis text. Depending on the setting, you might have a number of other immediate resources that you can connect that individual with. But you want to say something like, sounds like you've got a lot going on. Your wife left you. You're worried about your job. And as a result of all of these things, you're thinking about suicide as a possible solution. I'm glad we're talking, and I think we need to get some extra help. I'd like to connect you to someone who can provide some additional assistance. It's important that person knows, right, that their life is so important to you that we want to make sure we get others involved, right? That this is beyond you and I to be able to ensure safety right now. In the last step, if we find ourselves using these skills, is to debrief. Helping someone in a suicidal crisis can have a profound effect on us. We might think about that conversation for days afterwards. We might have a sense of anxiety and replay in our head the conversation and be thinking about what we could have said differently or what we should have said or what we shouldn't have said. So regardless of the context, it's important that if we find ourselves using these tools, that we find a way, so a peer, a colleague, a family member, a friend, a supervisor, to debrief this conversation. Ask for support. We're all in this together. So that indirect invitation, and we talked about those before, right? We're having a typical interaction with somebody, in person, over the phone, whatever the setting is. And initially in that conversation, there's no direct concern about suicide being expressed. But during the course of that conversation, we hear or we sense something, we observe something that causes us to be concerned. So we notice the person seemingly very distraught or perhaps agitated. We hear them making comments such as, I feel trapped, right? Or there's no point in trying anymore. And we talked about some of those other examples that you might hear. Trust your instinct, right? Invite them to have a caring conversation with you. You might say something like, I've noticed you seem really upset and you've made some statements and some comments that suggest you're really having a hard time right now. Is there anything I can do to help? Or is there anything you'd like to talk about? So we want to first let that person know that we're aware that they seem to be struggling right now, that they're not invisible, right? Once we invite them to talk about what's going on, we want to give them the space to do so. And ask ourselves, are they inviting help by telling their tale, right? What we're hearing might not be connected to suicide, but it might be. The only way to find out is to ask directly. So you might follow up by saying, wow, you've got a lot going on right now. You seem really sad and desperate. And sometimes when people start feeling these extreme emotions and experiencing different stressors, they might start thinking about suicide as a way to escape that pain. And I wonder if things have gotten so bad that you're thinking about suicide. Again, you'll find your own voice. You'll find your own way to ask the question, but we want to sort of link what it is that we're hearing and seeing and observing as the context of why we're asking about suicide. If the person responds no, and we believe them, then we can say something like, I'm glad things aren't so bad you're thinking about suicide. And then see if there's other problem-solving supports or resources we can offer to connect them to. If the person says yes to our direct question, thank them for sharing, and then we want to transition into those previously identified guidelines, following up with, have you already done something to activate those thoughts? But, what if you provided the opportunity for the person to talk, but despite your efforts to engage them, they opt not to talk or walk away, right? They've acknowledged thinking about suicide, and we try to get them to open up, but they choose not to when they walk away. What do we do next? Well, that can likely vary, obviously, on the situation and the scenario. You might consider at least offering that person a resource, 211, a crisis text, or whatever resources you are aware of. If it's happening at work, certainly you want to be sure to let other people know. Let your supervisor know about that interaction as soon as possible. You can tell that person, if you'd like some information on how to connect with resources in the future, if anything does come up, I have some information that I'm happy to share with you, right? Some people might be reluctant. Some additional things to think about when you're having this conversation: be yourself, be genuine, let that person know you care. We've talked about some of these others before. Offer hope that these feelings won't last forever. Reassure that person that help is available and those suicidal feelings are temporary. Let that person know their life is important to you. And remember, the right words are often unimportant. If you're concerned, your voice and your manner will show it. No matter how negative the conversation seems, the fact that the conversation exists is a positive sign. Helping someone linked to safety and additional resources, as I stated before, can be very rewarding, but emotionally draining. Make sure you debrief the experience with someone afterwards. So we're going to pivot now. We're going to do a brief role play. And here's the scenario. So Kathleen and I are going to do our best to portray this scenario. I'm going to pretend to be a parent. Kathleen is going to pretend to be this recent senior in high school, having done school virtually since April of 2020, feeling loss of those normal activities, theater, sports, was really looking forward to 11th grade honors classes and relationships. So that's some of the context in this role play. Feeling anxious about the transition back to full-time in person, even though those losses of those other activities occurred. In this scenario, there's no previous symptoms of anxiety or depression or history of mental health concerns until the pandemic started. In this scenario, there's no current plan and there's no imminent risk. So that's some of the backdrop. And most recently, the most recent stressor going on is a loss of a part-time job for getting into an argument with her manager. So as Kathleen and I go through this scenario, I want folks to be listening for those warning signs, maybe risk and protective factors, to be listening for the tale that will be told. All right, so Kathleen, are you ready?
Mhm.
All right. Hey, good afternoon, Kathleen. How's the first day of school? It's been a minute since we've had a chance to even talk and debrief. I'm sorry, I've been so busy at work.
Yeah, it sucked. I can't stand it.
You can't stand it? Why? You were looking forward to it.
No, I don't know. It's just not the same anymore. I don't have any friends left. They're all doing their own thing, and I don't get to talk to them, and I don't think anybody likes me anymore.
Oh, come on, that can't be true. I see you on the phone all the time. It seems like you're chatting, and if you're not chatting with friends, what are you doing?
I don't know. I don't know. I just don't feel right. I feel like everything's falling apart, and like I never in a million years thought that my life would be like this.
Oh, I'm sure it'll get better. It's just a phase. It'll take you a minute, but you'll get there. You were, really looking forward to going back this year. And what about classes? And what about, you were really looking forward to getting back in theater.
Yeah, well, I feel like I lost all that. I've been practicing, and now there's other people that I don't know, and you must think I'm like a loser for losing my job. I didn't mean to. I don't know. I just am so mad all the time, and I feel like sometimes I just don't want to do this anymore. I just don't.
You know, hey, you'll find another job, and you know, everyone blows up once in a while. You know, it's just one of those lessons you got to learn, and you know, I'm sure it'll get better. Maybe we just need to do something to distract you. You know, would you want to go out for some ice cream or what?
You just don't get it. You don't get it. How could you get it? Like you don't get it. You didn't have to live through this. You didn't lose your job, right? You don't feel like a loser. Sometimes I just want to go to bed. I don't want to wake up. I just want to sleep all the time. I don't want to talk to anybody. I just don't want to look at anybody. I don't know what to do. I just don't want to do this anymore.
Wait, this sounds different. This doesn't sound like you. I mean,
I don't feel like me. I don't know what to do. I feel like I'm going to jump out of my skin. I feel like I just want to crawl in bed and never get out.
I'm so sorry. I didn't know things had gotten that bad. I just thought, you know, everybody's been struggling over the pandemic. I didn't realize things had gotten that bad. What else is going on?
I don't know. I can't explain it. I feel like I don't know. And then that's what makes me so upset is I can't explain it. I just feel like the world is a mess and now I'm a mess because I lost my job. I feel like I have no purpose. I don't know. I just don't feel good. I feel lousy.
I wish there was something I could do to change that and make it go away. You know, I'm glad you're telling me this. And, you know, as a parent, it's sort of hard for me to.
I don't want you to be disappointed in me, Dad. You know, I know I've always tried to do things and that's why I'm so frustrated because I just feel like you're disappointed in me because I lost my job and I can't get out of this funk. I don't know what to do.
You know, we all make mistakes. We get speed bumps once in a while in our lives. You're not a disappointment to me. But with some of the things that you're saying, I didn't realize it was this bad. And I'm concerned. And it's not easy for me to ask what I'm about to ask, but you said some things. They have me scared. You know, you said you don't want to do this anymore, or you wish sometimes you could just go to sleep and not wake up. And well, you know, I wonder with thoughts like that and statements like that and everything you described, it sounds pretty serious. And I wonder if things have gotten so bad that, well, have things gotten so bad that you've thought about suicide?
Yeah, I guess I think it's, yeah, I'm afraid. I don't know really if that's exactly what I'm thinking, but if I could make this all go away somehow, maybe I don't have any ideas of how I would do that, but I just feel alone. I feel frustrated and I'm sad and I'm scared and I'm, you know, it's just, I don't know.
Oh,
I don't know, Dad. I'm just really down. I feel very down.
And so I hear you saying all of these things are building up. It sounds like things have piled up quite a bit. And they've gotten so bad that once in a while, suicide's become an option just to sort of escape all of that.
Yeah, to make it all go away. So I don't have to feel like this. But I don't really want to die, Dad. I don't want to die. I want to feel better. But I don't know how to feel better.
I hear that. And it sounds like if you had any other choice, any other options to explore, that you might be willing to sort of gravitate towards those and at least see what those options might hold. Is that true?
Yes. I need your help. But I don't know what to do.
I mean, you talked about a lot of big stuff happening, and as much as I wish I could take all of that stuff away from you, I can't, right? And we don't have to fix everything at once, but we can start with like trying to figure out what's the best way to help get you maybe some extra help and support so that you're not feeling like crap, right? Have you talked to anybody else about how you've been feeling recently?
You know, some of my friends, you know, we talk, and some of my friends feel the same way. You know, we're just, I don't know. I don't know what you call it. Is it called depression? You know, everybody at school is saying, you know, that they just feel the same because things are so different and they miss their friends. And
well, and I don't know, and I'm, you know, I don't know enough about it, but I know that there are people and there are resources that can help us figure that out. Have you talked to any of the adults in school since you've been back, or? And
no,
you know,
no, I've just tried to act like everything is all right. But I think, you know, losing my job was like the final straw.
well, and that, you know, when that happened, I know that's not like you, and you know, you don't usually have a short fuse. So I guess I wasn't really paying attention to the big picture, to everything that's been going on. But you know, you've always had a good relationship with the family doctor. And I know that, you know, you go in there on your own, and I'm sure they ask you whatever questions they ask. I don't know if you've talked to them before, but I'm wondering if maybe one of the first steps we can do is try to get an appointment with the doc right away and let them know there's some things going on, because they can probably help talk about other resources and other things that we might be able to do. And I know you brought home all these like magnets and stress balls before, and you know, you've seen the crisis text number before. Maybe you can consider using that. Well, we get the doctor if you need to. Would that help, do you think? Or maybe we can try it together?
Yes, I would do that if you'd help me.
Yeah, I mean, I've never used it before. I don't know what to expect, but maybe we could practice like what you would text right now. We don't even have to use it, and just sort of, and then we can try it and, you know, figure out. But maybe the next step though is, you know, before the doctor's office closes for lunch, we can try to get an appointment, and we can let them know it's really important. And however long it takes, you know, especially if you're not feeling safe, and we can, we'll make sure we spend some time together. Is there anybody else that you would want to talk to besides, you know, getting an appointment with a doctor and crisis text, like, you know, any of your cousins or your aunt or uncle?
No, not right now. I think if we make an appointment with the doctor, because I do like the doctor, and the fact that you're listening to me, and I think if we start there, maybe that'll help me a little bit. So maybe we could maybe do that.
Okay, and we don't have to figure out everything at once. You've got a lot going on, one step at a time. But you know, I'm so glad that you shared with me what was been going on, and we'll figure this out. And the way you're feeling, I know it's got to feel really awful right now. It won't feel like this forever. We'll get through this.
Thank you so much for listening to me, Dad. I really appreciate it. I guess I should have come out to talk to you earlier, but I didn't know how to start. And I'd like to go get ice cream now, please.
We can do that. All right. And that will sort of end the scenario. Thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you, Garra. I almost started to cry because you were so wonderful. So thank you.
And so before I ask people to sort of fill in what they're seeing, again, you know, if this hits close to home for anyone, please reach out to your own supports and resources. Please follow up with anyone that you know on the call. You know, because these can sometimes hit closer to home than we anticipate. So that being said, what kind of warning signs and risk protective factors did you notice in that scenario? You can populate them in the chat function. You're now feeling listened to and not alone. Possible depression, absolutely. Giving up, yep. What are some other things? What other tale did you hear? Lost a job, given up, calling yourself a loser, not wanting to wake up, confusion, yep. Loss of anxiety, hopelessness, feeling like she doesn't want to disappoint her father, loss of self, excellent. Friends, feeling, right? Thanks, Kathy. All right, so not sure if all of these came up. You know, some warning signs, bouts of anger and outbursts. Prior to that, you know, usually upbeat, beginning to shut people out, not feeling like fitting in. I don't think we introduced gender identity issues, but that's okay. You know, started making comments verbally to her father and you know, online that they're feeling done. Well liked and connected with peers. Typically, that was a protective factor. That although there's a loss around that, it was also a pre-existing area where she was liked and connected with peers, a good student. So obviously not all of these came up, but these were sort of part of the general scenario. So thank you all for sharing, you know, your observations in this. So just some additional resources and that folks have. The Suicide Prevention Center, we have a wealth of resources for parents, students, teachers in all different manner on our website. There's additional resources on the National Suicide Prevention Lifelines website. Crisis Text Line has resources. The Trevor Project, which is specifically a crisis line for youth that identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, questioning. And one last thing, I think, that I want to share for Suicide Awareness Month opportunity, specifically for schools, we're encouraging all schools to participate in the Got5 Challenge. You can see the description there. We're asking school districts to send an email to students and faculty about the crisis text line and include a link to a video featuring New York State students. We're asking schools to post the SBCNY crisis text line video on school's social media page. It's to promote crisis text line. The first 200 schools that sign up and complete the challenge will get promotional materials sent to them. So if you work at a school, you have kids in schools, whatever it might be, we're really trying to have a statewide footprint with the Got5 Challenge this month. And always a good slide to see. That would suggest that we're at the end there. So I want to thank everyone for just amazing participation in the chat function, for your reflections, your questions, your feedback, your stories. I want to thank Kathleen, who I've had the privilege and honor of knowing for a number of years, and everyone else from Families Together for the opportunity to be here. So I'm going to put a pause on talking and see if there are any questions that folks have that I can try to address.
All attendees will be able to unmute themselves. You can also use the hand raise function on the bottom of your Zoom screen.
I see Julia has a question. Can you hear? Okay, Julia. You're on mute if you're trying to talk. Oh, okay. And just to let folks know, sometimes those questions come up like after we disconnect, or sometimes people would prefer to ask questions offline. So I'm certainly entertain any questions after the fact. So the slide deck will be shared. I'll make sure, I think Kim has the most recent version, and through whatever mechanism makes sense, absolutely, we'll be sharing those.
Margarita has a question. Margarita?
Yes. Good afternoon. Good morning. My question is with my nephew. He was 13 years old when he committed suicide. The family moved from New York to Florida, to Miami, and he never had any signs. He was very quiet. What do you do in that case? I remember that he called me the day before he hung himself, and I was talking to him for an hour and telling him that maybe he can come back to New York and live with me. And the next day, parents went to work. He was supposed to go to school, and the school called my cousin saying that your child didn't show up. When she went home, he was dead. But he never has, but he suffers from depression and anxiety. But he never talked about that he wanted to commit suicide. What do you do in that case?
First, Margarita, my heart aches for your family's loss. You know, some people are really good at hiding whatever's going on in here, right? And whatever's going on in their hearts. Some people are really good at that. And then when we talk about kids, adolescents, whose brains really don't fully develop until 25, what seems like an insurmountable problem that will never go away. Whereas for many adults, we have the wisdom of hindsight and life experiences to say, okay, well, we can sort of get through this. For many youth and adolescents, they just don't have that capacity. And so there can be a very impulsive element to suicides, especially with youth and adolescents, not exclusively, but kids in particular, faced with those stressors, can go from 0 to 60 really quickly, right? And they can act impulsively. And unfortunately, there's this thing called hindsight bias, that if we were to look in the rear view mirror and maybe talk to other people and pick up a little statement here, or an action here, or a feeling state here, maybe if we saw things in retrospect in the big picture, perhaps we would have seen things differently. And that's hard not to do as a family member. And so, you know, it's hard to say in that instance, could anything have been done differently? I'm not sure. I think my hope and my belief is that, you know, by having information and tools and skills and resources, that in many instances, we can have that impact, right? And even if the topic of suicide never comes up, but we're concerned about somebody, sometimes we can just have that conversation and say, whether it's a child or an adult, and say, like, who would you talk to if things ever got so bad you were thinking about suicide? Do you have somebody you would reach out to? And I know those can be awkward conversations and they can be uncomfortable, but just having a peace and a comfort with talking openly and directly about suicide can literally save a life. I don't know if that answered any of your question, Margarita.
Yes, thank you.
I think
yes.
too, Margarita, I'm a survivor of the loss of a suicide as well. And I think I'm also a co-facilitator of a support group for individuals that have lost someone to suicide. And I think what Garra had just stated, the hindsight bias is huge amongst anyone that's lost someone by suicide, right? We always say, but what if only? And so I think when Garra spoke earlier in reference to our self-care, that comes into play so much with that, because how we would have stopped it, right? How we would have done what we could have if we knew. And I had a brother-in-law that died by suicide, and at the time, we really didn't see anything either. And so I think when these things happen, it's so important for you to take care of you. And to do what you need and to reach out to others, you know, that may have a similar situation that you have, for comfort and support. And again, as Garra had indicated, I'm very, very sorry for your loss as well. And it's very difficult. But yes, talk to anybody. I think that's the most important thing. And thank you for joining us today, Margarita. You're welcome.
I saw a question from Julia. Did I touch on whether a person has made a plan? Yes-ish, I guess. So in short, if somebody's acknowledged they're having thoughts of suicide, I would suggest that one of the more immediate questions we then want to ask is, have they done anything to put those thoughts into action? So basically, if they've already taken some pills, or if what they're saying and doing suggests that they're in imminent risk or danger to do so, then we need to act accordingly. But if they haven't done anything to activate their thoughts and they don't appear likely to, then generally speaking, that's going to give us more opportunity to do more listening and explore other non-emergency resources, perhaps. Specifically as it relates to safety planning, I didn't touch on that if that's what the reference was to. And certainly for anyone experiencing thoughts of suicide, that should be a part of what is eventually explored and developed, right? Is, okay, in 2 months from now, if these thoughts occur again, what can you do that's self-soothing? How can we make sure to limit access to means, and so on and so forth? So I'm not sure if that's exactly what you were getting to, but that's absolutely a very crucial part of helping somebody with thoughts of suicide.
And again, I want to just reiterate for all of you who are survivors, who have lost someone to suicide, our thoughts and prayers are with you today and this week, this month. And we hope that this has helped a little bit with recognizing the signs and gives you a little bit more comfortability in asking someone if they're having thoughts of suicide. And always we're here to reach out to any of us. Myself and Garra, I know for sure if there's anything we can do to support you further. Does anybody have any more questions before we close? Because we want to thank Garra so very, very much for giving us this very important workshop and taking the time to be with all of us today. I thought it was amazing. I always learn something new, and it's something we can keep with us, if we're ever in that position where we need to ask somebody.
And the last thing I will just share is I've heard so many loss survivors say, and I think this bears repeating, is that, not to think about your loved one in their last moments. It's not how they died, it's the life that they lived, right? And to keep that alive. And as long as we speak people's names, right, and they're always with us, right? So to remember people and how they lived.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I know it's a Friday, but I have a homework assignment for everyone, and that is to do something certainly today that's restorative in nature. Do something to take care of yourself, whatever that is, not just today, but, come up for air. This has been a heavy topic. Go for a walk, listen to music, connect with a friend, take care of yourself.
Yep, and there's always your parent advisor in your region you can reach out to that have resources as well. I did mention that I have a co-facilitator of a support group for individuals that have had a loss by suicide. So if you'd like to join our group, we're out of Madison County, but we welcome everyone. Right now it's virtual. And I could also try to connect you with other groups, as I know Garra knows probably more than I do. Or if you'd like to get involved with any of your local coalitions, I'm very involved with my local coalition here, my Suicide Prevention Coalition. We have them pretty much in every county. So let myself or Garra know if that's something you'd like to become involved with. It's a good way to voice prevention and have a voice and, you know, work within other individuals. So there's that option as well. I'll put my email in the chat for anybody that needs it. And again, we thank everyone so much for being on this valuable workshop. And again, Garra, thank you so very, very much for all of the information. You are an amazing, amazing man. And I am also very blessed to know you for these many years. And we thank you from Families Together in New York State for doing this webinar for us, this workshop. And we thank all of you and wish you all well. And we leave you with positive thoughts today.
Well, be safe.
Thanks, Garra. Kathleen.
Bye.
Is there an evaluation?